What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com. Here are my DFS picks for NBA Friday, February 12th. These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button and hit that bell icon so you don't miss our new videos. In this video, I'm going to go over my top picks for today's NBA slate. And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made. Okay guys, let's take a look at the point guard position. I'm going to give you a value play here, especially on FanDuel. I like Patty Mills from the San Antonio Spurs playing the Atlanta Hawks, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they give up the absolute most fantasy points to opposing point guards. Patty Mills has averaged 21 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 26 minutes per game with a 20% usage rate. He scored 18, 19, and 19 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 23, 28, and 29 minutes. He's projected at 21.2 fantasy points here tonight. That's 5.6 times value. He's only $3,800 FanDuel salary, but he is $700 more on DraftKings, so it's probably a FanDuel play for me. But Vegas thinks there's going to be 228 points scored in this game, and he's got pretty good player versus team history here. He scored 19, 24, 24, 13, and 22 fantasy points in his last 5 games versus the Atlanta Hawks. So on FanDuel at this $3,800 salary, he was hitting value 4 out of those 5 games. So I like Patty Mills here versus the Atlanta Hawks. Okay, another point guard that I like is Ja Morant from the Memphis Grizzlies playing the LA Lakers, who have a good defense overall, and they've been good versus opposing point guards, but Ja Morant has averaged 33.6 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 29 minutes per game with a 29% usage rate. He scored 33, 35, and 32 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 30, 36, and 31 minutes. He's projected at 34.7 fantasy points here tonight. That's 4.9 times value. He's $7,100 FanDuel salary and the same price on DraftKings. He scored 55, 18, and 49 fantasy points in his last 3 games versus the Lakers. So 2 out of those 3 games were monster games. So I like Ja Morant here versus the LA Lakers. Okay, let's take a look at the shooting guard position. I'm going to give you a value play here. This is a FanDuel value play. I like Alec Burks from the New York Knicks playing the Washington Wizards, who have the 3rd worst defense overall, and they give up the 2nd most fantasy points to opposing shooting guards. Alec Burks has averaged 24.7 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 26 minutes per game with a 21% usage rate. He scored 20, 20, and 31 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 25, 28, and 27 minutes. He's projected at 24.6 fantasy points here tonight. That's 5.6 times value. He's $4,400 FanDuel salary and $800 more on DraftKings. He scored 16, 41, 9, 27, and 30 fantasy points in his last 5 games versus the Washington Wizards. So 3 out of those 5 games, he crushed value. Fantastic matchup, fast-paced game. So I like Alec Burks here versus the Washington Wizards. Okay, another shooting guard that I like is DeMar DeRozan from the San Antonio Spurs playing the Atlanta Hawks, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and although they've been pretty good versus opposing shooting guards, DeMar DeRozan has averaged 38 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 34 minutes per game with a 24% usage rate. He scored 24, 41, and 49 fantasy points in his last 3 games, playing 28, 35, and 37 minutes. He's projected at 38.4 fantasy points here tonight. That's 4.9 times value. He's 7,800 FanDuel salary and 200 more on DraftKings. He scored 51, 45, 49, 27, and 34 fantasy points in his last 5 games versus the Atlanta Hawks. So I like that player versus team history. So I like DeMar DeRozan here versus the Atlanta Hawks. Okay, who do we have at the small forward position? I like Michael Porter Jr. from the Denver Nuggets playing the Oklahoma City Thunder, who have the 3rd worst defense overall, and they give up the 9th most fantasy points to opposing small forwards. Michael Porter Jr. has averaged 29.6 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 26 minutes per game with a 21% usage rate. He scored 40, 23, and 28 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 27, 26, and 33 minutes. He's projected at 29.1 fantasy points here tonight. That's 5.3 times value. He's 5,500 FanDuel salary and 500 more on DraftKings. So I like that FanDuel price. Now, he scored 56 fantasy points in his last game versus the Oklahoma City Thunder, but he did have a 5 and a 3 in the 2 games before that. So not sure what happened in those games, but you can see he's got some monster upside in this matchup. So I like Michael Porter Jr. here versus the Oklahoma City Thunder. Okay, another small forward that I like, a nice mid-range play here, is Nicholas Batum from the LA Clippers playing the Chicago Bulls, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they give up the 12th most fantasy points to opposing small forwards. Nicholas Batum has averaged 23.8 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 30 minutes per game with a 12% usage rate. He scored 32, 25, and 30 fantasy points in his last 3 games, playing 35, 27, and 39 minutes. He's projected at 24.9 fantasy points here tonight. That's 4.9 times value. He's 5,100 FanDuel salary and 100 more on DraftKings. Vegas thinks there's going to be 228.5 points scored in this game, so I like Nicholas Batum here versus the Chicago Bulls.
Real quick, guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to Draft Dashboard. You can try all of our DFS tools for all sports. You can try the Position Optimizer, where you can see the top players ranked for each position. And we added a new Player Trends tool, where you can see the top salary differences between FanDuel and DraftKings. It's a really good tool to help you pick out value for the site that you're playing on.
Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups. Okay, let's take a look at the power forward position. I like Jarrett Allen from the Cleveland Cavaliers playing the Portland Trailblazers, who have the 7th worst defense overall, and they give up the 3rd most fantasy points to opposing power forwards. Jarrett Allen has averaged 29.8 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 26 minutes per game with a 16% usage rate. He scored 34, 25, and 13 fantasy points in his last 3 games, playing 25, 34, and 24 minutes. He's projected at 29.8 fantasy points here tonight. That's 5 times value. He's 6,000 FanDuel salary and 100 less on DraftKings. Now, he scored 41, 42, 21, 28, and 29 fantasy points in his last 5 games versus the Portland Trailblazers. It's a great matchup. It's a fast-paced game. Now, Jarrett Allen can be a frustrating fantasy player. He's got a low floor. Sometimes he just doesn't show up to play. But when he's on his game, he can put up some big numbers. and I expect his ownership to be somewhat low because he's a high-risk play. But I like Jarrett Allen here versus the Portland Trailblazers. Okay, another power forward that I like, especially on DraftKings, I like Jason Tatum from the Boston Celtics playing the Detroit Pistons, who have the 8th worst defense overall. And although they've been pretty good versus opposing power forwards, Jason Tatum has averaged 44 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 36 minutes per game with a 31% usage rate. He scored 42, 34, and 41 fantasy points in his last 3 games, playing 36, 37, and 35 minutes. He's projected at 45.3 fantasy points here tonight. That's 4.8 times value. He's 9,500 FanDuel salary and 700 less on DraftKings. So I love that DraftKings price. He scored 58, 41, 43, and 33 fantasy points in his last 4 games versus the Pistons. I just think that Jason Tatum is ready to go off here with a 50-plus fantasy point performance. So he would crush value on DraftKings if he can get a 50-burger. Now, this is a back-to-back, but he should be playing plenty of minutes. So I like Jason Tatum here versus the Detroit Pistons. Okay, let's take a look at the center position. I like Al Horford from the Oklahoma City Thunder playing the Denver Nuggets, who have a good defense overall, and they've been good versus opposing centers. Al Horford has averaged 33 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 28 minutes per game with a 23% usage rate. He scored 60 and 29 fantasy points in his last 2 games, playing 33 and 34 minutes. He's projected at 35.1 fantasy points here tonight. That's 5.7 times value. He's 6,200 FanDuel salary and 500 more on DraftKings. So I like that FanDuel price. He scored 27, 34, 41, and 29 fantasy points in his last 4 games versus the Nuggets. He's been playing a bunch of minutes. I like that he's played 33 and 34 minutes in his last 2 games, so well over his season average. So I like Al Horford here versus the Denver Nuggets. Another center that I like is Steven Adams from the New Orleans Pelicans playing the Dallas Mavericks, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they give up the 7th most fantasy points to opposing centers. Steven Adams has averaged 25.8 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 29 minutes per game with a 13% usage rate. He scored 18, 22, and 11 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 21, 21, and 29 minutes. So his production hasn't been that great, and only playing 21 minutes in the last 2 games, it's a bit concerning, but he is projected at 24.4 fantasy points here tonight. That's 4.7 times value, and he's 5,200 FanDuel salary and 200 more on DraftKings. Now, the reason that I like this play is because he scored 21, 28, 47, 36, and 28 fantasy points in the last 5 games versus the Dallas Mavericks, so exceeding value in 4 of the 5 last games. And Vegas thinks this is going to be a high-scoring game. 233.5 points scored in this game. It's a good matchup, so I like Steven Adams here versus the Dallas Mavericks.
If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to draftdashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smickety smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this NBA slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again, and good luck.